Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from Kansas Soybean Commission. The Soybean Checkoff. It works for everyone.
I keep reading about engineered corn, but I don't know what that means.
Spring water, purified water, what's the difference?
Is imported beef safe for my family?
Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy. That's where Real Ag comes in. From plant to plant and from pasture to plate, Kyle Bauer and the Real Ag crew find the facts to help you sort the truth and help you understand Real Ag. Now here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
Soybeans, once a minor player in the American agricultural scene, have now become a very important crop. What makes the soybean so special? We'll find out today on Real Ag. Unlike corn or wheat, soybeans are legumes. This gives them a specific set of traits that growers, processors, and consumers can benefit from.
The soybean is actually a legume plant. It's a podded plant with seeds in the pod. It's of this bean variety. Beans are legumes and generally edible, although in the case of soybeans it wasn't edible for a couple thousand years after the original production of a soybean. And it was about in the vicinity of 1000 BC, so about 3,000 years ago in China. While it was part of their rotation, most of the rotation at that time was to introduce nitrogen into the soil to make the soil better rather than being edible. It was a couple thousand years later before they started eating it.
Soybeans are a legume, which means they fix nitrogen. They're able to take nitrogen out of the air and utilize it for the soybeans' own needs, but they also put it in the ground, and so that we can use that for fertilizer for the next year's corn crop.
So it's not a user of nitrogen, it actually gives nitrogen to the ground. So on an every other year crop rotation, the corn uses nitrogen, the soybean gives nitrogen, and it reduces the cost of any other nitrogen that the farmer must add artificially.
We're a no-till operation, which means we disturb the soil as little as possible. We plant the seed, we control the weeds, we fertilize the ground, and then we harvest. We load them up in the truck, we haul them to town. We determine a price that we think is profitable, or the best price we can get.
We start the process by cleaning the soybean. We crack the soybean into about 6 parts. We dehull and suck that hull off of there. It then goes through a flaker, and it looks somewhat like a corn flake in both dimension and thickness. And then we put a product called hexane to attach to that oil molecule, and it goes off in one direction, and then we take the rest of the flake and go through a steam process that heats, kills the trypsin inhibitor, then we grind it and use that for hog and poultry. On the other side of it then we take this combination of hexane and oil, which we call micella, and then we drive off the hexane through steam again, through heat, and then keep reusing the hexane, and the oil then comes as a crude soybean oil. The next process in that, we degum. There's gums and gook that's in soybean oil, and we use centrifuges to drive that off. And that product is used, we call it lecithin, but it's used in candy and other confectionery products, and has some significant value. We take then a refined and deodorized and bleached product and further refine it into salad oil that you would see in a grocery store, whether it be a Wesson oil, a liquid oil that you would see in a store. Or we do some hydrogenation as well, and that's introducing a hydrogen molecule into the soybean oil, which merely changes the melting point. So if you took a Crisco hardened oil in a grocery store, that white hardened oil, and said, how do I compare that to a Wesson liquid oil? Heat it up, it's the same thing. In terms of massive commercial ag, it was after World War II. There were beans introduced a long time earlier. As a matter of fact, before the Declaration of Independence, the soybean was introduced in the United States. About 10 years before that, a sailor came with some soybeans. But again, in terms of commercial agriculture, it was after World War II. Prior to that, though, Henry Ford actually used the soybean. He bragged about using 120 pounds of soybeans in each vehicle that he made. And that was both in terms of lubrication and making seats and upholstery items with it. So he did a lot of research. Back in the early 30s, he spent over $1 million. And by the way, that was a lot of money back then in terms of soybean research and how he could use that in the automobile. Our soybean products, soybean meal, primarily go to the Pacific Rim. We have a facility at Grays Harbor out in Washington, and from there we ship to the Pacific Rim countries as well as Australia, New Zealand. About 1,000 years ago they started eating, and you can't eat a soybean plain. It has some properties in it that mostly there's a trypsin inhibitor. A trypsin is an enzyme in the body that makes protein digestible. And there's a trypsin inhibitor in a soybean that makes it so we can't digest the protein. And therefore it has to go through a process of some sort to kill the trypsin inhibitor, whether that be heat or whether it be a fermentation process.
The traditional soy foods that we're finding in the grocery store now would be soy milk, soy flour, edamame, soybeans, and the variety of it is really expanding in the grocery store, that we have more choices for consumers. Ever since the Food and Drug Administration announced that consumers need to have 25 grams of soy protein every day, there's really been an explosion of new products that have come out in choices for consumers. And I think that's exciting for consumers because food manufacturers are able to actually put on the packaging how much soy protein is in a package. So we're now seeing cereals, we're seeing yogurt, we're seeing cheese, a lot of different choices for consumers that we have on the market, and more coming out each day. There are many health benefits for soy. We think of the reducing the risk of heart disease, but it's also, and the research has shown that it helps prevent cancers. It prevents some of that. We think of allergies. A lot of people will include soy when they're allergic to other foods. For women, it helps with osteoporosis and menopause, and the reduction of the opportunity for cancers.
Soybeans are primarily grown for food, but most of them go to feed livestock rather than people.
Soybean meal is actually about 80% of the soybean. Roughly 19.5% of a soybean is oil. The balance is the meal portion. The meal portion goes into the livestock sector, both in terms of poultry and hogs primarily.
Aquaculture is raising of production of fish for human consumption, and where primarily they'd always used fish meal, where now they're converting to soybean meal. For one thing, soybean meal is much more stable product, has a much better shelf life than what the fish meal does, and it's been a healthier and more productive product for them.
And that's a concentrated protein. They mix that then with corn and vitamins and trace minerals and what have you, and generally we'll get down to a 14 to 18% product to feed to hogs, in the case of poultry, and 18, 19, 20% product that they'll feed to the poultry. But that's where the animal gets its growth and the protein for that growth. Biodiesel is, it's been kind of the savior to use some of the excess oil. We've had an excess amount of oil within the United States. We're seeing that decrease primarily because we're able to use some in the biodiesel. And it's helped the farmer in a number of ways, to the degree that right now we're paying about $100 a ton more for soybeans than we're selling the soybean meal for after we spend the money to process. Why? Because the oil is taking a greater portion. We're getting about 45% of our revenue from that 19 to 19.5% oil that comes out of a soybean. So the farmer doesn't see that impact. Primarily our soybeans go into the poultry and hog industry because that's the rations that they use. We have produced an Amino Plus product that's a bypass protein that can be used in ruminant animals. So that's going into the dairy sector, and we have 3 of our soybean processing plants currently producing amino plus, and so that's been very helpful. In addition, we take the whole of the soybean, pellet it, and it's used for cattle as well. It has a protein of 10 or 11%, fiber of 35 to 40%, so it works very well for ruminant animals to give them both a protein and a fiber content.
Soybeans are also used in a staggering amount of foods made for human consumption.
I think one of the things with soy that I think consumers are probably most surprised about is that when they look at a package of any food product, they're liable to see soy as an ingredient on the packaging. More than 80% of the items that you come out of the grocery store with will have soy as an ingredient added to that particular item. So it's really important to the food industry. But we also have another ingredient or another product that I think consumers will be surprised to know that is the only ingredient in it, and that is vegetable oil. And if you look at a label, the only ingredient in vegetable oil is soybeans. And soybean oil is a very healthy oil and something that consumers should include in their diet as well.
About 90% of all the vegetable oil in the United States comes from soybeans. Obviously the others, peanut oil, cottonseed oil, canola oil, flax, and so there are other oil seeds, but 90% come from a soybean, so a very important plant in the United States. Worldwide, soybean oil is number 2.
You know, when we think about soy, it's a relatively new ingredient or a new food here in the United States. We think in China, we've had soy for 5,000 years, but here in the United States, it's only been here since the 1700s. So for Americans, it's relatively a new food, one that they have to really become acquainted with. And it hasn't been until the last 50 years that we've really seen it as a food product here for consumers. So I think it's an education process for them to see how they can incorporate it in their recipes without really changing their lifestyle. After several years of research and study, the Food and Drug Administration announced in 1999 that all Americans should include 25 grams of soy protein in their diet every single day. The American Heart Association has also endorsed that. And at that time then, the Food and Drug Administration also allowed companies to put that information on their packaging. So when you're looking or making selections of soy foods in the grocery store, you can readily see then how much soy protein is in a particular item. The 25 grams of soy protein are recommended to reduce the risk of heart disease, and you should have a low-fat diet to do that, but it has been shown with research and then FDA approved that by including 25 grams of soy protein in your diet, you can reduce the risk of heart disease. For those consumers that might be lactose intolerant, soy milk is an excellent choice, and it can be substituted equally in recipes and used just like regular milk. And with soy milk, then you also have that choice of whether you want to purchase a plain or a vanilla flavored or a chocolate milk. Be sure to read the label, because when you have a flavored milk, the sugar will increase in that. And with soy milk, there's not a standard of identity. So it's very important to read the label so that you know what type of calories and what type of milk that you're actually drinking. And I suggest to consumers, if they try a brand and they want to try a different one, then use it in cooking, because every brand will be different. Because most of the items in the grocery store that you come out of the store with, if you look at the back of the label, even a candy bar is going to have soy lecithin in it. But soy lecithin is not a soy protein value. It is used as an ingredient to help in the processing of that food particular product. But when we look for soy protein, then we want to look at the labels and actually for the protein content. And even cereals will have that on the label on the outside. But that would be our soy milk, our tofu, our soybeans, our soy flour. The other items would be an added ingredient to help in the food processing.
Soybeans that a consumer would see straight up, a lot of candy, confectionery products, cosmetics, resins, plastics, inks, clothing, crayons. We're just a multiple use. Each year we're developing new uses. Now, in each case, it's very small incremental uses. If you go, well, now we can make crayons out of soybean oil. Does it use a lot of soybean oil? No. But over the long term, the more uses we can have, the more internally we can use and not be reliant on exports.
Soybeans, like any other crop, are tightly regulated by a number of government agencies.
In terms of government, certainly USDA monitors our facility. They come occasionally and measure up to make sure that what we say we have in terms of inventory is what we really have. They also ask for reports of how many bushels do we have on hand at any given time. We send monthly reports on that. They want to know what kind of production we have. So USDA have those type of components. EPA have various regulations. DNR have various regulations in terms of emissions. Department of Natural Resources. So anything that might leave the plant in terms of dust or any other types of emissions are regulated.
Soybean production is not without its challenges. The industry is always on the lookout for ways to improve both crop quality and quantity.
South of us, about 10 miles, they had a hailstorm 2 days ago, and it completely wiped them out. Anything that was left in the field is now gone. But during the growing season, it takes a dry spring. We need to get them in the ground, get them planted, and then we need a few timely rains in the summer, and stay away from the serious heat, and we'll grow a pretty good crop of beans. Whether or not we have a good crop or a bad crop is largely determined by the weather. The weather, just any time of the year. Waiting to harvest, besides just the tension, is there's a lot of money out there. We've worked all year for this right now, and if you can't harvest it because you've got no place to go with it, you've got the potential of a hailstorm, inclement weather of any kind. What happens if it starts snowing tomorrow and we can't stop? We can't run. And the crops sit out in the field, and as they sit and are mature, every day you wait, there's less to harvest.
I think that there will be modifications, but mostly in a genetic kind of a modification to soybeans. We have seen some slight increase of bushels per acre, but not to the extent that we've seen in corn. So I would think that probably it's going to take some genetic type of modifications to get that next level. The genetics right now, it's remarkable, particularly in Kansas, where rainfall is a concern, and right now the genetics in soybeans, the soybean almost seems to stand still when there's no rainfall for a while, and it gets some rain and starts thriving again, where years ago it would have just died.
It's the same thing with chemicals. You want to change your mode of action. I mean, Mother Nature has a way of protecting herself, and she finds a way to build resistance to those. So you need different modes of actions.
In the United States, our soybean production in terms of making the meal is somewhat steady over the last decade or so. Other countries, however, are growing, particularly in South America. Right now, the United States is the largest producer individually as a country for soybeans, but Brazil and Argentina together exceed what the United States produces in soybeans. So those extra bushels are feeding the rest of the world, particularly China. China is an enormous importer of soybeans and soybean products. They only produce about 6% of the world's soybeans. They use about 40% of all exports. And as one becomes well off, you decide to change from rice and beans to steak and potatoes. And their population is demanding a better diet. And a better diet means there's going to have to be meats available, and to make meats available, they have to import those protein needs. I think primarily, again, with genetics, we have a certain amount of land that we kind of rotate between corn and beans, but it's not going to grow. We have the land that we have, and from here on out, we're going to have to just go more bushels per acre. Pests or rust or just things that could hamper the overall yield, as well as the natural calamities, the hail, the wind, the flooding, the drought. the things that we've seen for years. But beyond that, in the past years, we've heard about rust issues. Kudzu is a plant that's grown down in the south more from an erosion standpoint, but there's a bug that kind of eats on kudzu, and it's starting to hamper some of the southern states' soybean production as it attacks that as well, because it's, again, a legume as well as kudzu is. Hydrogenated oil, which we produce here, has trans fat issues. And the reason you hydrogenate oil is to extend shelf life. And because of the trans fat issues and the concern with health, we're looking for a low linoleic acid soybean that would have an extended shelf life without the hydrogenated process. Some of that is, there was a Vistiv bean that we've processed in the past few years, but they're also introducing new genetics that would lower that linoleic value and extend the shelf life. So again, that's going to come through genetics. We're looking for ways to change and make it make a better bean, a better oil, a better meal without any other changes that might adversely affect the health of a human being. I believe that the seed companies themselves are doing research, and they're looking at what does the consumer want as well as what does the producer want. We have to have something better that doesn't have yield drag. Anything, when Roundup beans first started out, some of the producers were thinking, well, I might get a couple bushels less per acre, so I can't afford to do it. So you have to make something compatible with a producer so that he doesn't get less revenue, but at the same time make it better for the consumer. As long as we can find those things that are a win-win situation. It doesn't have to be a lose-win, it can be a win-win. And will the consumer pay for something that is more healthy? And at times, even though people want something more healthy, the price tag inhibits their behavior, and they still go, it's cheaper, and I'll take my chances. So if we produce a seed that universally has lower linoleic acid, that is now commonplace, we're not making special runs, therefore no additional cost is incurred. Anything that currently is being used out of petroleum products can now, for the most part, be used out of soybean oil and in a safer manner.
We're excited about the future of soybeans. I've only been farming for 7 years. I'm fairly a short timer. But in those 7 years, we've seen our yields go up, and they're up slowly, but 1 to 2 bushel a year. And I think yield potential for our soybeans is fantastic. There's people growing 100 to 100, the new world record is 130 bushel. And do I think we can get there? Well, eventually. I'm excited because our soybeans are more consistent now than they ever have been. Used to be corn around here was the mortgage lifter, is what they'd call it, because each year in, year out, we could grow 100 bushel corn, and our soybeans would be all over the board. Well, that seems to be changing. Our corn yields are still consistent, but our soybean yields they're also very consistent now. As time has gone by, as things have progressed, as research has and technology and production methods continue to improve, we are able to produce more bushels of soybeans per acre of land. We're able to utilize, we're producing more with less resources. We don't burn as much fuel. We don't use as much fertilizer. We're just getting more with really the same or less inputs on acres that really continue to dwindle. As the world's population continues to increase and those people demand higher quality food, and in addition to fuel and fiber and all the other things that we're able to make out of soybeans, we're very fortunate that we have the research in place, the technology there, and people willing to invest, seed companies, chemical companies, trade groups. Everybody's willing to invest to try and improve our soybean yields, to try and feed these people that we know are coming and we know are going to want to eat.
That wraps up this episode of Real Ag. We hope the information presented here will give you a better understanding of the soybean. On behalf of the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bauer, helping you sort the truth and helping you understand Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from Kansas Soybean Commission, The soybean checkoff. It works for everyone.